Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar, 5 Steps to Get Everyone on Board with Your Records Management Initiative. We're going to go ahead and get started. The purpose of this webinar is to present 5 key steps for getting change initiatives to make them successful. We have some panelists who are expert records management specialists, and they will be sharing the strategies that they use to get through these 5 steps with their change initiatives at their organizations. Now, the types of initiatives we're going to be discussing today are primarily digitization of records, but the techniques are really applicable to almost any kind of change initiative. What we're really trying to get at today is the people aspect of change. How do you start those conversations to convince others that change is both necessary and beneficial? So if you have ideas for how you want to strengthen your program, which I'm almost positive you do, you'll be able to get some great techniques during today's program. Here's a brief overview of our agenda so you know where we're going. In a few moments, after we introduce ourselves, I will hand the reins over to our panelists who will be going over tips for the 5 steps, which are securing support from management, collaborating with IT teams, convincing users to get on board with change, ensuring change is really adopted long-term so people don't slide back into their old habits, and overcoming resistance to change. At the end, of course, we'll also have some time for questions from the audience, which brings me to just a few notes about housekeeping before we get going. If you think of questions during the webinar, please send them to us through the chat feature in this platform. If they're a question for a specific panelist, please just let us know. We'll collect all of the questions and answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, we are going to record this webinar, so you'll be able to access it again in the future. We're going to email out the link to the recording after the webinar is over, so look to receive that within a few days. Now, just to introduce ourselves really quickly, my name is Danielle Gilstrap. I'm the content curator for events at Laserfiche. I'll be the moderator for our panel today. And Alyssa?
Hi, my name is Alyssa, and I am the International Marketing Associate here at Laserfiche. I will just be here in the back end answering any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So if you have any technical issues or just any general questions, feel free to send anything over to me.
Okay, and now for the stars of our show. Here are our panelists. Could you each please introduce yourselves and give our attendees a brief description about your organization and the type of initiative you'll be talking about today?
I am Rochelle Baldock. I am the Information and Records Manager at Ramsey County, which is located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Ramsey County is the 2nd largest county in Minnesota, and I actually work within the IT department of Ramsey County. My responsibilities, amongst several things, include records management for the whole county, and then I'm also the system owner and implementator of Laserfiche for the county. And the initiative that I'll be discussing is some online countywide training that I put into place over the last few years that's become mandatory. And then I'll also discuss kind of our unique approach that we use to train users on Laserfiche.
Great, thank you. And Gloria?
Hi, my name is Gloria St. Dennis. I'm a records management consultant and business process improvement specialist for Absolute Consulting. I am currently on a project for Transnuclear Americas, TN Americas, work in the nuclear industry. And their issues were the fact that they felt that they needed a new system. When I went in to analyze, turns out they didn't need a new system, they just needed to overhaul the existing one. So I'll be speaking to that.
Thank you. And finally, Deborah.
Yes, I'm Deborah Cartwright. I'm the Director of Data Compliance and Records Management for Keller ISD, which is a school district just north of Fort Worth here in Texas. We're what you call a mid-sized school district. I will be mainly addressing how we're digitizing. We've completed digitization of our HR records and have begun on our student records, and just mainly trying to free up floor space because we need it for people. So we'll be kind of going at it from that angle on my side.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for the 5 steps, the first one that's really critical is securing support from management. In order to do that, you really need to establish a thorough understanding of the problem you're trying to overcome and how the solution is going to affect your organization. Gloria, could you start us off by talking about the process you went through in building a plan for transnuclear?
Sure. Do you have the next slide? Okay, very good. As I mentioned earlier, transnuclear, they were generating 500 to 600 records weekly, and management got wind that the users were experiencing difficulty in finding documents. There was a lot of confusion with duplicates and a lot of inconsistency between the departments and how they were implementing records management into their groups and departments. So we were able to develop new processes for submitting records so that we could standardize, properly index them into the system. So my task when I was first brought in was to analyze what it would take to migrate that data. I found out that they're really not using the tools that were given to them in a way that they should have. So I found out the tool wasn't the problem, it was the way it was configured. Search was not helpful to anyone because of the complexity of how their system was set up. So turns out, you know, the doc control group or records management group, they were the search engine for people. If anybody needed anything, they would go to them and say, you know, I'm looking for this, can you help me find it? As a result, I got a group of people together. Management did agree that all we need to do was strengthen the records management program, add more bite behind what it was doing, and to maybe make some upgrades to their system in order to add the ability to automate and put data systematically into their ECM system. So fortunately for me, management agreed that they would do that instead of the migration, which was good because it definitely cost a lot less to stick with what they had and improve that versus go into a new system. So I started by talking with a group of folks that I'll call the stakeholders, and I went on the internet, I found an appropriate records management survey, I had them fill it out, I brought it with me to their first meeting, and that's what we talked about. So the results of the survey, as you can see here, you know, we talk about workflow and versioning and searching and organization and access to the system, retention, sharing data, and security. What were their pain points? And what it did is it allowed me to map out their needs and to be able to prioritize them. I also used it as a communication tool for all our meetings. So that's where I pretty much started.
That's great. And then I believe you also built a schedule to get the project going?
Yeah, is that the next slide? Or?
Yes, there might be a slight delay in changing the slide.
Oh, okay. So once we got the okay, we did go in with a plan with action and a schedule, which changed frequently. Now it's up on the screen, which changed frequently. It was important to use that as a basis that I could review with the necessary people. It served as a roadmap, so they knew what they needed to be doing and when they needed to do it. I pretty much used it every time I went into a meeting with someone. You know, where's your name on this and where are you at with this? Because, and they had to see the impact it had by missing the schedule and the impact it would have later on down the line. So that became very, very helpful.
Okay, and then I believe you also had a method for getting what you called champions?
Yeah, the champions were a mixture of people, but we went from the ones who did things well in the system, and I chose them because, you know, they're like, well, I don't know why we're changing the system. It's working perfect for me. Well, that's good. We'll use you as, you know, we'll use you as a stakeholder. And then we had the high complainers. The people who complained about the system were the ones who were complaining to me. They were the ones complaining to management, so we needed them on board. Very helpful. Okay.
Okay, great. And now, Rochelle, could you tell us about what you did to convince managers to get on board with your idea?
Yes, I was had worked in a county for like 10 years, and I was promoted to this current position of information and records manager. And I was informed that I would need to go to new employee orientation about every 4 to 5 months and present kind of the IT version of things to new employees. And of course, I wanted to make sure I was doing it right, so I went and observed the other managers that I would be rotating with. And I realized that each one was giving a different message and definitely emphasized the area that was the area that they specialized in. So if the manager was a security expert, that's what he really talked about. If the manager, was just different, their emphasis was very strong on what they did for their daily job. And the message wasn't consistent at all. I came back and I thought that it would be a good idea if we made some online training. And I made the suggestion because I had heard that we had software in the county that was available, but no one had ever actually used it. And I spoke to the other managers, and I obviously spoke to my director and said, give me 6 months and let me see if I can turn this orientation training into an online training. And during that time, I don't want to have to present either to new employees. So that was the compromise. I didn't have to do any more presentations. I actually never had to do any. And during that time, I developed this new training, which ended up with a consistent message. The managers all saved time. I mean, they didn't have to go for an hour each month on a rotating basis. And then in addition to talking about computer use and security and then records management, I was actually able to incorporate HIPAA and data practices into the training as well, because in this new position, I actually became the data practices responsible person, responsible authority for the county, as well as the HIPAA compliance official. So I was able to incorporate basically 5 different aspects of training into one, and we got all that done, and the training takes most people about 45 minutes to do. So it was very successful.
Wonderful. And now, Deborah, could you share with us how you first started to build support for your initiative?
Yeah, we really had nothing when I first I was named the records officer for the district about 4 years ago now, and we really had not started anything at all. So I was working from the ground up, and at the time it was just me. I didn't have a staff or anything. So I basically started. I work in technology. That's where I sit. I sit under the CTO for our school district. And so I basically went to him first and told him I had a dream, basically. I just told him, I said, I have this project I really want to do. And he listened to me and heard me out, and he told me, okay, this is how you're going to have to sell this. And so he gave me some pointers about drawing up a plan. And in our school district, we have a superintendent, and under the superintendent is his so-called cabinet. And that's who I had to pitch it to and get approval to even get started on it. So I drafted, what the cost was going to be. I figured in, I figured in what was costing us now to store it by square foot in a huge room in a separate building. How much more staff was it going to take? What kind of cost was I going to have there versus the cost we were going to save by not making all these copies and having to store all these boxes and all this paper. So those were all the things that went into my planning document. I drew up a very loose timeline where I said, we'll attack HR first, and then we're going to do student records, then we're going to do business, and kind of followed it on through and kind of gave them a real broad timeline so they could kind of see the future of the project. It helped, too, that we had just had an incident where a counselor had taken about 21 student files, a high school counselor, home in her Louis Vuitton bag. And she'd left the Louis Vuitton bag in the back of her car, and it got stolen with all of the records in it. So that made my sell a little bit easier because that entire academic history for those students was in those files. And we had no way to go back and recreate 11 or 12 years worth of history on those kiddos. So that made it a little bit easier to pitch. Plus, here in the district, we're very lucky that we have our own in-house counsel. So she had been concerned about the liability of having records we shouldn't have and not having records we should. So those were all the things that I incorporated into my pitch to the cabinet. And once I met with them and they asked their questions and I made sure I was fully prepared to answer their questions, then the buy-in at that level was easy. And once I had their approval, then I just could start rocking and rolling. So that was kind of how we started out in trying to get the management support. And our superintendent has been very supportive of the project.
Perfect. Thank you. And I believe you also told me that one of the keys to getting your cabinet on board was really knowing their mindset and being able to answer their questions when you were pitching your idea?
Yes, I had been fortunate enough that I'd worked under a couple of them, so I kind of knew them really well, and my CTO was very good about kind of coaching me and prepping me and letting me bounce things off of him before I presented. But yes, they came at me with some tough questions, especially financial questions. So I had to make sure that I was ready, and I'd worked closely with our CFO to make sure that my numbers were right, you know, those kinds of things, because you don't want to go in and underestimate your project or overestimate it, because if you overestimate, they may not feel like it's affordable. So I wanted to be very accurate with all of the data that I provided to them. But yes, knowing it's like anything that when you speak, knowing your audience was key for us here.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And I believe you already told us the story of the purse and the records that got stolen from the car, which must have been pretty shocking.
It was upsetting, to say the least.
Yeah.
And therein was the liability factor that our in-house counsel had been concerned about all along. Is, you know, when you lose a record of that nature and then the parent comes back in the future and asks for it and you don't have it, it's really hard to explain it got stolen. Because there's Social Security numbers, birthdays, addresses, everything in that file. So, yeah, it's the kind of thing you're constantly hoping you don't make the news for.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's move on to our second step, collaborating with your IT team. For the types of digital initiatives we're talking about today, working closely with IT is critical since they'll be the ones helping to implement the changes. Gloria, I believe you worked really closely with your kind of IT counterpart when you were implementing changes. Could you describe that partnership for us?
I sure can. First of all, I was very close with him because the project I was on prior to that was the enterprise-wide content management system. So I was dealing with him on that issue, and he is pretty much the one who recommended that I go on this other project to do the evaluation of this other system, and it worked out really well. What I did to start with once I got management approval is put together that MS project schedule. But I made sure that everything I put on there they agreed to. So it was MS projects. If I put a person's name on there, I go to that person and say, okay, these are your deadlines. Can you meet these deadlines and these tasks? So I used the project schedule to do that. I also met regularly with them. When we were getting close to a going live rollout, I would meet daily. But we would at least meet once a week when necessary. It helps hold them accountable. So it was a good team effort.
Okay, and Deborah, I believe you also met pretty regularly with IT. Could you give us a little insight into that?
Yes, once we got rolling, we developed a team, and the team would consist of myself. I now have a records analyst who works under me, and then we have 3 IT staff that are dedicated to the project as well. And so we meet every week. We meet every Thursday morning for about an hour and a half, and that's just an opportunity where we can hash over things every week. And, you know, are the servers running at prime speed? Are we seeing any issues where records aren't going into the repository the way we think they should, or we need to add metadata fields, workflow, quick fields, those kinds of things. We also want to complete online enrollment. for our students. So we have one of the IT people is over the online enrollment process. So that's kind of a weekly thing that we keep checked up on and make sure that all the forms are moving through as they should, and that the people who should be able to access the forms can. So those are all the things that we discuss in that meeting. And you would think that meeting every week we wouldn't have something to talk about for an hour and a half, but we managed to fill that time up and more. So it's a very productive time for all involved, and we all walk away, you know, feeling solid at where we are with the project and what we need to get done.
Perfect. Now, moving forward into the heart of our presentation, how can you convince users to get on board with change? You'll frequently hear things like, but we've always done it this way. I'm sure that sounds very familiar to many of you. So how can we get people on board with change? Our panelists have a bunch of great tips. Gloria, why don't you start us off? How did you convince people to adopt change?
Well, I was lucky enough that management came to me and said we need to change. So, you know, I was able to a lot of times say to them, you know, we're changing because enough of you complained about it and you're getting what you want. That didn't always make everybody happy, though, because those that were using the system well, we would just hold them up as examples, as champions. Those who complained a lot, we tried to make them champions as well, as I had mentioned. I would demo the system to anybody who would listen and get their feedback, because the more they saw it and the more input they had to it, the more they were going to accept the change. So I did meet with stakeholders once every 2 weeks to show them what I had built. It helped build enthusiasm. It was sort of like letting them in on a little secret, and they were able to provide feedback to me, which was really good. I also provided a lot of training prior to the system rollout so they'd know what to expect. At that point, we would receive feedback. A lot of times I would maybe bring back a feature that they really liked that they were missing, if I could. So that's the next slide, by the way.
I think I actually got it. It's just our webcast platform is a little slow in changing.
Oh, okay. Good. Good. So just getting them involved helps them accept change much easier.
Right. So they feel less like it's kind of being forced on them and more like they're a part of it.
Yes.
Okay, now speaking of training, Rochelle, could you tell us about how you designed the training program for your organization?
Sure. As I mentioned, it started out with, I was just trying to kind of cover what IT was presenting in person at each of these monthly new employee orientations, which again was records management, computer use, and then security. I then added, well, I didn't add, in addition, when I created the training, I included data practices and HIPAA. The county made it required at first. Government really doesn't like the word mandatory, so they use the word required, and it's now become mandatory. But one of the things that I've heard over the years, and I understand it, is that, you know, a snowplow driver, for instance, doesn't necessarily need to learn about HIPAA, and I understand that. Some of our people, depending on the departments and the divisions they work in, they don't even access a computer ever. It's not part of their job. So we, effective this year, have split the training up into individual modules, and that way people are going to be able to be trained on the specific pieces of the training that applies to them and their work. So the snowplow drivers no longer have to take HIPAA training. Give me 1 second here. And then as far as when we, so that's kind of, I've been talking about the records management piece of my world. As far as Laserfiche implementation goes, typically we get solicited, if you will, for new projects, which basically means, you know, users, departments will come to myself and my employees, and they have great ideas and they want to implement a Laserfiche solution. What we'll often do is based on the known needs of the user, we'll either build out a prototype, just a very high-level prototype, or we'll show them a live example of something that's already been deployed. Because I think it's important for the users to be able to see and visualize what could be their future. It kind of shows them how things can be done. And I quickly learned that when I'm explaining, a computer system and I know it very well, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm explaining it in a way that the user would recognize it. So being able to build these prototypes or show an example of something that's already there is much easier for users to understand. And typically when people see how easy it is, that's what we try to, part of our implementation is to show people that what we're going to put in place is going to make things better. I find that they get excited and they're more likely and more willing to take the change on. And because they're excited about hey, this is what the new world can look like, and it gets exciting for them.
I think that's really great advice. You're kind of taking the unfamiliar element out of change. You're helping them to see what it looks like, and that's really what kind of intimidates people about change, is the unknown aspect. So I think demonstrations are a fantastic way to help get people more on board with change.
Yes, I definitely agree.
All right, now Deborah, could you describe the process you used when you were going to implement changes with departments in your organization?
Sure. What we do, the model that we've kind of followed is we go to the director of each department as we move through the process, and we ask them to pull in one of their staff members to be, we call them the Laserfiche liaison. We know the directors don't have time to interface with us all the time, so we ask them to appoint someone that will be their liaison between them and our department, working on getting their records, making sure their records are getting captured the way they want. So we have an initial meeting with each one of those directors as we come in and get ready to do their records. And we talk about, what their expectations are, how do they see it, how do they see the plan moving forward. There are certain documents that we're required to keep by the state standards, but then there are also internal documents that get created that they also want to keep. They want to add that to the retention schedule. So we go through all of that, and we kind of allay their fears that, we're going to come in and just go gangbusters on them, and, you're going to keep this and only this and nothing else. So we let them, we definitely listen to them. They have a voice in this. And then as part of that process, we go ahead and we draw, and I actually learned this at the Laserfiche Empower Conference. We do a statement of work where when I come back from that meeting, I draft up a statement of work that has each step that's going to be involved to get their records digitized, and the timeline and who in their department or our department will be responsible for each step. And then we do, we do a projected date, and then I have an actual date, and we keep that updated as the project goes along for their particular department so that they always know where we're at. They know, exactly if we get behind, why did we get behind, if we're ahead, yay, we're moving this through much faster. We post it out on a shared site, network site where everybody can get to it, see it, make adjustments as, suggest adjustments as necessary. But we felt it was very important that our stakeholders have a large degree of input so that they, so whether or not it succeeded for the department or failed, we would know why, and then we could, we can make those adjustments to keep them happy and make sure that they can get to what they need to get to, and that they're prepared, and if they get a records request or anything like that. That's the basic model that we follow. It really hasn't been hard to get anybody to accept change. Our HR department was the first department to go through it, and most everyone in the district has been exposed to it because everybody at some point has to go do something with HR. So they had seen how well it worked, and so the other departments really hasn't been a really hard sell to get them. In fact, if anything, we've had to tell people, I'm sorry, we're handling as much as we can. You're going to have to wait. So, and we're trying to make them wait too long, but we only have so many staff. But that's basically how we we pull them in and make them a part of it, is to make sure that they understand all the steps and that we're doing exactly what they want us to do and need us to do.
Great. So making sure the new system meets users' needs is really critical to making sure that it gets accepted.
It has been for us, yes.
All right. Well, now that we've talked about how to get people on board with change, it's important to talk about how we can ensure that these changes are long-lasting and that people don't slide back into their old habits. Sometimes it's not enough to just implement a new system. You have to make sure that it really becomes a part of your organization's culture. Otherwise, it ends up like that shiny new toy that gets played with for a little while and then left in a corner to collect dust. So how can we make sure that people really get on board with change long term? Gloria, what did you do to make sure that the changes that you were implementing at Transnuclear really stuck?
Well, what happened with us is the change was a big change. It was they were working very differently than what they were doing before. So the fact that the old habits didn't exist was because the old system and the old way of doing things didn't exist. So hopefully they got used to the new system. The other reason why they adopted this so well is because things were now automated. They were also obtaining a lot of benefit from the new processes. For example, it was a workflow that they didn't have to, remember whose name in document control they had to send their stuff to if they were sending it via email. What would happen is they just fill out the same form, attach their file, and it goes straight to doc control the group, and then somebody within the group would process the record. When they were done, the user would receive a verification email, something they never had gotten before. Also, the metadata was now consistent. If you needed to go in and search for something, you know what you're searching for. Every record is in there using the same consistent metadata, which made it much easier to use. So when things are easier to use, they tend to adopt it much easier. I find now my success in this is when I add a new user to the system, they automatically receive an email that tells them, how to get into the system and that they could contact me anytime for training. I rarely get any phone calls from anybody. Everybody knows I'm available, and I'm able to work on new tasks and new workflows because I'm not being bothered by people calling me all the time. I find that to be a success.
Awesome. And Deborah, what kind of strategies helped you in ensuring that changes at your school district were long-lasting?
Well, the main thing we did, or we have done, is we've created a records manual that was approved by our school board. So we've created this records manual that we update every year as needed. In that manual are all the laws and regulations with regards to how records are to be kept for a public school district in Texas. We do it mainly to ensure consistency and establish policies across all the campuses and the departments, but mainly it tells the user exactly what should be in a student's CUME folder, what should be in an HR folder. It gives them quick reference if they're confused or don't know what to do with a piece of paper. Is really what it is or an electronic. Now that we're going more and more electronic, the paper is getting, less and less paper. We found that most people really do want to do their job right. They just need directive and they need information to sometimes do that. We don't have a lot of turnover at our administration level, but at our campus level, we have a lot. We do have a lot of clerk turnover. So we have found this manual to be very helpful, and again, it's posted out on a shared site that they can get to it anytime they need to refer to it. They're always welcome to call as well, but this manual seems to be what they go to more times than not. The other thing that we have a committee that we've established of their peers who we meet with them maybe three or four times a year. And just to make sure we're, because they're going to hear the complaints and the things that aren't working well probably faster than we will. So we meet with them, make sure that, this change process that we're going through isn't too painful for anyone, and is there anything we can do to streamline it and make it better for everybody? So far, so good, though. I mean, the manual, like I said, has proven to be pretty effective in helping everybody stay on task.
So with this manual, I'm assuming no more taking records home in purses, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that is one of the big things and we also made that in our district. We have what we call administrative regulations as well, and that also got wrote up as administrative reg. So yeah, nobody moves. If paper files move, they move in a company vehicle between campuses or departments. No more private vehicles and private purses.
All right. Well, that sounds like a great resource. Now moving on, Rochelle, how do you make sure that people actually use the training that you created? I think you started to mention this earlier.
Yes. I'll tell you first of all something that I found interesting when I learned about the fact that I needed to go present, every few months at this new employee orientation. I learned that nobody's really was forcing employees to go to new employee orientation. I had actually been at the county for 2 years before I made time in my schedule or had the time to fit it in because it was a full day. And since I wasn't being forced to go, I just kind of didn't. So if you think about the fact that no one was actually being trained on computer use and, proper security when you're using a computer and those topics, I mean, it becomes really important. So that definitely gets managers and management in general on board. As I stated before, I did say that, initially the training was required, and the word mandatory is just not used in government, at least not government in Minnesota. But about 2 years in, it was decided that this was going to be mandatory training for everybody. And I put this training in place back in 2007. So since about 2009, this has been mandatory training, and everybody has to take it. New employees, they have 30 days to take it upon hire, and that is followed through with their HR clerical, the people in their department that are responsible for the HR duties. Typically will, ensure that they take the training at within that 30-day mark. And then annually now, and not now, but I mean since the beginning, this training isn't a one-and-done thing. When I created it, I mean, it was important to me to make sure that this got in front of people over and over and over again, especially, selfishly being the records manager. I wanted to get that concept into people's heads about their responsibilities. So the training is, it's required annually. And what we've done, about probably 5 years ago, we actually made the directors, the department heads, responsible for ensuring that their staff in their department completed the training. And we give the whole county, we're going to be releasing it here again in about a month, maybe 2 months, but we'll give the county 30, we haven't decided it's going to be 30 or 60 days this year just because it's broke up into individual trainings. You'll have 30 or 60 days to complete the training, and at the end of that, whatever the time frame is, the HR department can run a report and see, who completed the training and who did not within the department. And the directors are responsible for actually reporting why they don't have 100% completion. Back a few years ago, I mean, I was getting emails from directors saying, we're only at 98% completion because this employee is out because she's on maternity leave and this employee is out, for a different reason. But it was followed up that seriously, and it still is. This is now taken very seriously in the county.
Okay, and why don't you tell us about what method you use to make the demonstrations you do a little more fun and engaging?
Well, as you can see there, we got the flintstones and the rubbles. I don't use that in the training, the records management training, although I wish I could. That has to take a more serious tone. However, as the system owner for Laserfiche, we do have more leeway. I have more leeway in what we do with Laserfiche. So we try to make it fun and memorable when we do presentations or demonstrations of Laserfiche or training. And one day when we first were putting Laserfiche into the county, we needed sample documentation. I said, let's make the Flintstones family. And it just, it was a hypothetical. Everybody seems to know who the Flintstones are. And I had a staff member on the team who literally went home that night, and she kind of got into this. She started making, like, the Flintstones family, all their documentation. She made Fred a driver's license. Wilma and Fred got a marriage certificate. We've got Pebble's birth certificate. We've got Fred's pay stubs. She filled out forms, like state forms, with Fred and Wilma and Pebble's information on it. And I just recently, this was so funny, I saw that somebody had filled out a new, they changed their address. So there's now a change of address form in there. So they've moved, I guess. But due to the popularity of the Flintstones, we've also added the Rubbles into the mix as well. So when we do the training, we can, you know, we could make Barney a criminal if we wanted to, and we could make the Flintstones, you know, maybe they're getting assistance through the state or something along that line. But by bringing the Rubbles in too, we just can do a different set of documentation. We can just train differently, and just having, as soon as you bring up Fred's driver's license, and the whole room, or it doesn't matter if it's online training or in person, everybody remembers it, everybody laughs at it, everybody enjoys it. We do offer in-person classes at the county as far as Laserfiche training goes, but honestly, I don't, it's not really needed, and I try not to do it very much, just because it's not needed, because we use Laserfiche and it's pretty simple for us to use there, especially how we put it in place. So we have online documentation, just kind of how-tos, and then we also have online videos that we've created at the county. And again, I try to bring the Flintstones in there, because if you need to show a sample document, it's really great to be able to show the real document and not have to redact everything. And nobody wants to see a training document where everything's redacted. And so being able to, you know, show Fred's driver's license and include his address and that kind of thing, it just makes everything more realistic for the users. And it kind of brings things down to earth. It's a little less intimidating. It's definitely memorable.
Perfect. And then earlier you were talking about making sure that records management stays on people's minds. And you mentioned having them do the training annually, but you also put out a bi-monthly tips, right?
Yes. Yep. We have a newsletter that comes out. It's kind of like a newsletter that comes out from the county manager's office, and bi-monthly we put in a records management tip. In fact, it just came out yesterday, and the one I didn't know which, I forget which one is coming out, but yesterday was about email management, and just telling people email is a, you know, the content is a record, and just, you know, helping people to remember that. And it helps me to reinforce the training that I'm offering them or giving them that they're taking. The focus is for us to, we want to keep records management in front of people. It's something that isn't very popular amongst everybody, but it's everybody's responsibility. So it's kind of our motivation and on my agenda for the next several years to just keep, you know, really advertising records management and making sure people know how to manage records and where to go if they need help, and kind of the resources that are available to them. And for myself, I really pay probably too close of attention to the news, but I think any chance you get to include, you know, something real life, something that just happened, if I can include that in a bi-monthly tip, you know, even if I have to, you know, put the tip in sooner than I had planned, but, you know, you think an Enron, you think something like that. I mean, just, you know, the file or the Louis Vuitton bag being stolen out of the car. I mean, I've experienced that you know, I've dealt with that at the county as the records manager, having, you know, those types of situations happen. But when you get something that's all over the news, you can definitely use that as a, you know, an example. I always, in my training, this is just something I've always put in. I always say, you know, when you're doing your job, and this isn't necessarily records management, but remember, and this is government, but I always say, remember, everything that's happening could be on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper. And so that's how we really try to, you know, I think that it's important that we do our jobs and do them well.
That's great advice. Now, for our final step, overcoming resistance. With every change initiative, there's always going to be a few people who are skeptical or hesitant, and some who might even just refuse to change. It's pretty hard for people to alter the habits that they've built up from years of working a particular way. It's what's comfortable for them. It's familiar, and even if it has problems, at least they're familiar with the problems. So with change initiatives, they're entering into new and unfamiliar territory, which can be very intimidating. Rochelle, I'm going to pick on you here again. When you encounter resistance to the changes you're trying to make, what do you do?
Well, I definitely, realize that they need to have time for their adjustment and they need to overcome their learning curve. I always, and this is something I've always said, no matter what I've done, honestly, in my personal life and my professional life, but give it 6 months. Let's get this change in place. Let's try it. I keep them involved from development through deployment, and my users, at least, my close users that are helping develop whatever the solution is. And I love suggestions. I always tell people, give me suggestions. I'm open to them. But I always say, I always just kind of nail down that, give me 6 months, just try this for 6 months. And so far, no one's asked me to take Laserfiche away from them. One of the most exciting thing for me, and this is silly, but it'll make my day, is, when the most hesitant of users suddenly becomes the Laserfiche cheerleader. And then they come up with, then I start getting these emails. It's just so funny. Every time you do a new deployment of the system, we end up with all these ideas. You've got people talking and they get excited about the solution, or a solution that's just different. And now you've got the people that, were against it and they realize there's benefits. And that's what I want, and I want to encourage them. And we've got a way for people to submit, change requests or ideas or proposals for new ways to use our system. And knowing that they can do that makes people feel a lot better. And if they have an idea that I haven't thought of, my team hasn't thought of, that is wonderful. Because if we can make anything more efficient for our employees, that's just exactly what we need. This was just the other day, and I knew I was doing this webinar, but I read this quote, and I just thought this is going to be my new motto. But the quote was, "Art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics." And that may go on my tagline for my signature at work now, because I like it. But it's the people, once we allow them to be creative and start thinking of different ways to use systems, I think that's great because you're involving them then.
Perfect, and that's a great motto. Now, we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to skip forward just a little bit. Gloria, could you briefly tell us what you do when you come up against resistance?
Yeah, we did have some that were kicking and screaming, saying, why can't I drill down my stuff anymore? It was easier before. I don't think they realized the effect of drilling down had. If you're a records management person, you know how much better it is to be able to search for your data and how much broader the search will be and more information that will get returned to you rather than trying to drill down. It's just like using a file cabinet. So, early in the process, we did remind them that management asked for this change, and we did provide a lot of training.
Okay, that sounds like great advice. And finally, to wrap things up, Deborah, could you tell us about what you do? I believe you told me that you start with departments who are eager for change first.
We did. We started with, like I said earlier, our HR department, and they were just chomping at the bit to get started. So there was no resistance there whatsoever. And, I will say one of the things that we made sure we did with them is before we put anything out there for them to use, we just tested it, so that when we finally brought it out live and online for them to use and to do, they didn't have to experience the pain of a change, really. We were pretty sure that it was going to work when we put it out there. So that one went very smoothly, and then because of the lessons we had learned with that first initial, it went so well that we've got people lined up now that they want to jump on all but one department, and one department absolutely refuses, doesn't want to do it. So until they feel more comfortable, we're going to leave them alone, let them chug along. We've got plenty to work with right now, and we're not going to force it on them by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, we basically just started with HR, and everybody else has been pretty pretty anxious to get going. Now, when we get to the campus levels, where the campuses are, they were a little resistant. Most of them did just fine. We went, like I said earlier, we went to full online enrollment where the parents can enroll all of their kids from the comfort of their home. They don't even have to leave their house, which is great for them. And since the parents like it so well, that's not going away. that is here to stay. And that just emphasized and enhanced the capture of digitized records on the enrollment process by leaps and bounds. That helped us tremendously get that going. We have had campuses. We had one last year that absolutely refused to do online, and they continued handing out paper packets. And basically what we told them is that's fine if that's the way you want to continue doing business, but you will do your own scanning and you will get those records into the repository, because ultimately all records will be in the repository. They did that last year. They are not planning to do that this year. May sound a little harsh, but that was, you do have a choice. You can continue doing it the old way, but ultimately you're going to be responsible for getting it in where it's seen by, you know, everyone in one place. So that's kind of how we handled that. But I think the key thing is for us is we made sure that before we put anything out there for them to use, it worked, so that they didn't have to go through the headache and the pain of watching us try to struggle to get it going for them while they were still hanging out there with nothing. So that's kind of the thing we've done here to overcome any resistance we've managed to bring forward.
Okay. Well, I think that just about wraps up our 5 steps for getting people on board. Now, before I open the floor for questions, I just really quickly wanted to let everyone know, in 2 weeks, we're doing another records management focused webinar. Gloria from Transnuclear, or Absolute Consulting, who is helping Transnuclear, is going to give an in-depth presentation on her change initiative, how she analyzed the problems, and how she built a plan for implementation, and the solutions that she used to make records management much simpler and easier for the company. Now, this is bound to be a great presentation because her solution that she built together with her IT counterpart actually won an award for Most Transformative Process Initiative. So be sure to tune in for that. And finally, I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A. Now, just remember that if you have a question, give it to us through the chat feature or the Q&A feature in this platform. So please let us know what's on your mind.
Okay, so sorry for the delay.
I'm sorry.
For Rochelle, could you let us know where you get your tips for the bi-monthly newsletter that you send out? Aside from the news, are there any websites that you look at?
I look at many, many websites. I also use my counterparts in other counties and other cities. We exchange records management training ideas, and sometimes, you know, it's just, you know, simple things. Email is not a records storage location. I mean, you got to just sometimes be that blunt. I mean, that's sometimes as short as a tip can be. You know, it needs to be in an official record-keeping system is what we'll say. But I do a lot of Googling. AIM and ARMA are great websites. And then there's a lot of just great records management resources just by searching online. They're just amazing resources out there.
Go back. And another one for Rochelle. Once the new hires were on board, did you have refreshers on this training?
Yep, it's annual, so everybody gets the training annually.
Okay, and a question for Gloria. How do you start to develop a schedule for implementing changes?
Well, you sort of go on previous projects that you've been on and start developing the schedule that way. After a while, you get to know and understand, you know, the steps, the tasks that are involved to get a project rolled out. So you treat it like a software project.
Okay, and for Deborah, when you said that you thought about the questions that the cabinet would ask when you gave your pitch, what types of questions did you prepare for?
Mainly going from their viewpoint, how is this going to help my area? You know, because each of the cabinet members are over a specific area of the district. So I kind of broke the district down by their areas and had prepared answers for, well, it's going to help you this way or that way. You know, this is the cost involved with how it's going to help you. This is like, for instance, for our instruction and learning community, there's a lot of, our department, there's a lot of involvement with our parent community. So I kind of bulleted for them how we thought this would help the parents and make it, the parents have easier access to the information that they need for their students. Just those kinds of things, just really focusing on their individual departments and what we thought this was going to do to enhance their daily work lives. Not to mention just the main thing for us in our school district is we've grown very rapidly, very fast, and we're out of room. And so it was mainly, if we free up this room that records are standing in, you can put 3 more staff in there, or you can use it for training, or those kinds of things that we were looking at. It was all encompassing, really. I was looking at everything that I thought would help them out.
Okay. And we have one question. One of our panelists mentioned using Microsoft Project as the software to create a timeline. Are there other programs that are helpful in getting organized when implementing projects by department? So I think this is a general question for all of our panelists, but Gloria, I think you were the one who used Microsoft Project?
Yes, I did. And I loved it because, and it was really my first time using it on a full project from beginning to end. It was nice because you could, provide resources and, times, and it was just very, very, very useful. I mean, you can even do it just on an Excel spreadsheet, depending on how big your project is. I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas.
Well, this is Deborah, and I use, because our district has an adopted project as a software system of record for us here, I used Excel. I just did my statement of work in Excel, and it's basically like project. I list the task and the dates, and I just build it out that way, but I do use Excel.
And I have used both. I have used Excel until I learned Project, and now we use Project.
All right, well, it's noon over here on the West Coast, which brings us to the end of our webinar. So as we wrap things up, I would just like to thank everyone for their time and participation. Like I said, we have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks, so I hope you'll join us for that. And we'll be emailing out a link of the recording within the next few days. For those of you who are current Laserfiche users, we're actually going to be having a raffle. If you fill out our feedback survey that will be going out in the email, you will have a chance to win free registration to our Empower conference for 2018. So be sure to look for that link. For those of you who are new or just hearing about Laserfiche, if you'd like to find out more, we'd love to show you how it can make records management more efficient. Just click the link that Alyssa posted in the chat to get in touch with us. We'd be happy to set up a demonstration. So once again, thank you for your time, and I hope to see everyone again in 2 weeks. Have a great day.